Good evening, sir.
Good evening. What's going on today?
Well, you know, my oldest son is majoring in film studies because he plans to live with us for the rest of his life.
Yeah, get your basement fixed up.
Exactly. But he did get called to go be a makeup artist, a makeup model for a horror movie. So he was all excited and he wanted them to let him leave with the makeup on. And then he was going to go walk around campus.
Oh, that'd go well.
But they only left a little bit on because they said it was intellectual property.
Oh my.
But it was amazing how realistic it looked. He looked like he had been in a fight and then he had died from his injuries. And
Oh
so,
my.
yeah.
What every mother wants to see.
Well, I sent it to a couple of people and they freaked out and they were like, "Oh my God,
Yeah.
what happened to Nick?"
Yeah. Yeah, that wouldn't be that wouldn't be good. And so is he are all of his classes face to face now?
No, he's got a lab face to face and that's it.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to be a little unprofessional. The life of a principal, everybody needs to know this. You know, I had a basketball game tonight, so now you got to do all this kind of stuff too. So hey, it is what it is, right? I gotta cram food in really quick because I just walked in the door. So I'm gonna cram food in. Thank God I have a great husband who cooked me food. So
Well, good for him.
Oh my gosh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
He's all right
Yeah.
half the time.
Yeah, I
I'm
have
waiting to see if that happens for me when we start back in a couple of weeks, and my husband will be home till the end of the month. So I'm waiting to see.
he
when I go home, that's all I do is cook for Tina when I go home. Of course, the last time she attempted to cook, she about burned the house down. And she turned the stove on, and all the takeout menus were in it. So,
Oh
my
my God.
wife my wife, I don't guess, has cooked. She poisoned me when we were dating. So I guess it's been about 40 years since she's attempted to cook. And so she wears DoorDash out during the pandemic. But my favorite cooking story is right after we moved to Lake Norman 26 years ago, there was a really nice cooking shop called The Farmer's Wife. I think it's a national chain. And she got hooked up with them and went over and wanted to take cooking classes. And I said, well, it can't hurt. Famous last words. And so about $2,000 later, she bought a mixer and a pizza stone and, you know, a big KitchenAid and all that stuff. About $2,000 later, she came home and cooked one pizza. And she said, I'm done. And so I guess that's the last time she's attempted it. She did make one pizza after all that, bought all that equipment, spent all that money at Farmer's Wife. So,
Hello.
so I am the cook.
Yes. Who am I speaking with? Michelle Coleman.
Well, that's not a bad deal.
Yeah. You'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah. So I go home and cook for 2 or 3 days and leave her. Now Tina won't eat leftovers, so I just cook while I'm there. She won't eat leftovers. Of course, I don't blame her on that, but I cook and have myself 2 or 3 days at a time. All right, I see the clock on the wall says it's time to get started. Welcome to Mels 603. This is our 4th weekly schedule session. Thank you all of you who are joining us live. I'll go ahead and get started tonight. First thing I want to do is share my screen. I want to revisit the OMA briefly. If anybody has any questions, you should be blasting right through OMA 2, Task 2, because remember, it's just a copy and paste. And all that we've done last semester and again in Task 1 and Task 2 is to get ready to build that master schedule or to revamp the one in task 3. And I thought Brad had a good response this week, and I'm going to share that with you. And now, understanding that this is 25 years old. So this is not new, and I'll tell a story when I get through reading this. When administrators create a master schedule for the school, there are many aspects that have to be considered. It is the goal of the principal to maximize student learning time, as well as meet all the requirements from federal, state, and district level. A well-planned schedule can result in more effective use of time, space, and resources. It will also have an overall impact on the instructional climate and help with the delivery of instruction. That's from 1995. Thank you, Brad, for pointing that out. That's from 1995. Now, the story I want to tell is this one. When I first started teaching in high school 40 some odd years ago, we had what was considered at that time a great principal. And when accountability started for real in the late 80s, he moved to the central office and in personnel, because what made him a great principal was his people skills. During his era of the principalship, he was not required to be an instructional leader or even worry about instruction. The master schedule was not there to help improve instruction. It was it was a way to reward teachers who had been there, give certain teachers that had certain status in the community, certain classes, and certain kinds of kids. And he was very good at that, and he went on to work in the personnel office, but he never became superintendent, and everybody thought that he would, but he didn't, because he was from a different time and a different era. His skills were mostly in personnel and people, very people oriented. Everybody loved him in terms of his, but he did not make superintendent, and he would not even make principal these days, because what he did as principal was the antithesis of what principals are expected to do now. It's not, the master schedule is not an expression of the politics of the district you're in. It's solely there to maximize the resources that you have, get the teachers and the kids together that need to be together per EVOS, in terms of who should be teaching what courses and what kids. EVOS tells you all that in the fourth of your factors or your rationale and master scheduling. So it's not new what we're doing now. I said that to say this. Most principals nowadays are not nearly as old or have or started like I did in the era before accountability. All principals now understand accountability and what their job is in terms of getting student performance. However, not all principals understand the role of the master schedule in that. I'm doing a PD tomorrow for a school district, and I've got some APs and some principals that I guess they're making them do remediation with me on master scheduling tomorrow, because they're not using their master schedule to understand that it's the underpinning of their academic program. Just because we've been in this era of accountability for 30 years, and that master schedules, we discovered in the early 90s that master schedules set the tone, that doesn't mean it's happening in your building. So you've got to assess what's going on in the process in your building. I don't want you just looking at the master schedule itself. I want you to, in OMA Task 3, assess the process. Are we going down the line? Are we looking at our federal laws? Are we looking at our state laws, our local board policies? Are we looking at our EVOS data when we're making decisions about how to schedule schools? Although it's been around for a long time, I'm afraid a lot of schools don't do that. And what I want you to, I'm interested in what's going on at your school, but I'm more interested that you learn to do it the right way. One of the things that I have to caution students about as they go through these courses in their clinical at their school is that, yes, we're interested in what happens at your building, but we're more interested that you learn to do it the right way, so that when you get your opportunity, you will know the right way to do things. And what we've laid out for you to do in this course and in the OMA is the right way. That is the right way to do a master schedule at your building, and all this data and all the things that have to go into it And if you don't have that information, or if you don't bother to gather that information, it's not going to turn out well for you. So that's kind of my final on the OMA. We've got some folks who are already to task 4. Everybody's breezing through 2, getting to 3. 3 is where you need to spend your time looking at the process. How is the master schedule developed in my building? Do they go eeny, meeny, miny, mo? Do they just get some people to me? How is it done? Do they go down the line and do the right thing? So if you have any questions about the OMA, get in touch with me. Send me an email. Everything I've read so far has been fine. I've not had to send one back or one to the coaches. Everybody seems to, this is, Dr. Stedman said that this was, and the 601 people said y'all were the best. Dr. Hamilton and those folks said y'all were the best group they'd had in a long time or maybe ever. And so I can see that reflected in your work, but don't hesitate if you need help to let me know. But I think everybody's got it. So I'm going to move on. So we're moving into 3 now, and then next week we'll be into 4 so that we can accelerate on through. But if you have any issues or questions, as you know, don't hesitate to call or send me an email. All right, so I want to talk about our discussion board for the night, for this week, discussion board 3 on negligence. Now, share screen. I can close that one out. Now, the 2 areas, this is Robbie, and thank you, Robbie. This is an excellent response if Robbie's with us tonight. But what I want to point out is what Robbie has here in loco parentis. That means in place of the parent. So understand negligence, financial responsibility for negligence. You're under much stricter guidelines. The expectations are much greater for you as a public school or as a school administrator or a school employee because of this in loco parentis clause. That means that you can't just do what in law is known as the common man, or we now call it the common person standard. What would a common person do in this case? You have to go beyond that. What would a parent do in the case? So you've got to understand that you're being held to a higher standard when it comes to negligence, when in terms of students, bad things happening to kids, being hurt, injured, bullied, damaged. You legally are held to a higher standard than the common person on the street, and you need to understand that. Robbie pointed that out in her response, and thank you again, Robbie, for that, for reminding us all that we have a higher standard. So reflect on educators have been financially responsible when students get injured. That's because of foreseeability. You should be able to foresee down the road that if the kid's up on the roof, that you might ought to get him down, that potentially that kid's going to get hurt. Would you let your kid get up on the roof? Those kinds of things. And so here are the 2 areas that you're most likely to get hit with lawsuits or charges against you for negligence. And we're going to talk about the 3 types of negligence in just a second. The most likely areas that you're going to get hit are 1, inadequate supervision. Every principal is required by law, and let me go to that one right quick. And this is what it says in the law. I've got it highlighted. The principal shall assign duties to teachers with regard to the general well-being and medical care of students under 307, Article 26. This is 115C, 288E, duties and responsibilities of the principal. You are required to assign teachers both to the duty roster, which is supervision of students during the regular school day. That's bus duty, car rider duty, lunch duty, hall duty, cafeteria duty. You're legally required to do that. And then the supervision schedule is after school activities. So that's the most common place that you're going to get hit with lawsuits, is inadequate supervision. For example, The rule in a large area like a gym or a cafeteria or an auditorium is 1 to 45. During the school day, if you don't have at least one adult for every 45 students, you can be held liable for negligence. You didn't have adequate supervision. So if you've got 300 kids in the lunchroom and 3 teachers and a fight breaks out, it doesn't matter that 30 people couldn't stop the fight. You didn't have adequate supervision. And so the notion is if you have a teacher, say you're the administrator and you did the duty roster and you published it, you put it in the faculty handbook, but if you have a teacher who doesn't show up for lunch duty, not only is that teacher liable, if it's known, if you know that teacher is not showing up for lunch duty and you haven't said anything to them, you're going to be liable as well. That's where that in loco parentis makes the standards much higher. Not only is that teacher liable that didn't show up for lunch duty, if you know that teacher on a regular basis is not showing up for lunch duty, and you haven't done anything to ameliorate that situation, you're going to be liable just as well. So supervision is the biggie. Teachers leaving their classroom. If you know that Miss Jones at 10:30 every morning wanders down to the copy machine because nobody else is using it at that time and leaves her class unattended, and you haven't done anything about that, or if you know Miss So-and-so's bad or Mr. So-and-so's bad to leave at lunch and then got one of those split lunch schedules where you got a triple lunch shift, they don't get back for the second half of their class. They think they can run out during lunch and get back in a hurry, and you know that they're doing that and you hadn't said anything, and somebody gets their eye put out while they're gone, it's not going to go well for you or for them. So that's the first one on the negligence is inadequate supervision. The second one is use of restraint. Oh my Lord, that's such a can of worms. And so here is what the state law under 115C391 amended says. Let me pull that one up for you. Aha, here we go. All right. School personnel may use physical restraint only in accordance with 115C391. May use reasonable force to control behavior, to remove a person from the scene. Any of the following reasons: to correct students, to quell disturbance, threatening injury to others, to obtain possession of weapons or other dangerous objects, for self-defense, for protection of persons or property, to maintain order. And it says that you will not be civilly liable for reasonable force as long as you're in one of these situations. It's the burden of proof for the claimant to show the amount of force used was not reasonable. Now, here's the problem with that one. Here's the problem with force. Unless you've been trained in restraint, you're probably going to get hit with one of those and you're probably going to lose. That's number one. If you haven't shown that you went and took that restraint training, they're probably going to claim that you used an inappropriate amount of force or that you did something wrong. That, especially, or even if you've had the training, if you in any way use a chokehold on a kid, in any way, and I'll be the first to admit, that's the easiest way to get control of the kid. You cut their air off, it's amazing how compliant they become really quickly. Except you can't do that anymore. And so that's the one. If you're involved in some sort of a restraint, even though they have to prove that you used unreasonable force, if you use restraint, there's a good chance that you'll get sued over unreasonable force. Again, that under that negligence clause, that you use an improper restraint or technique, that you weren't trained properly. Why did you come in, jump in this fight? Now, most districts have in their handbook, and I'll pull that up right quick, but you don't have to jump in a fight. Let me say that again. They have it in their handbook. You don't have to jump in to stop a fight. Teachers don't have to do that. Administrators, it's kind of questionable, but teachers don't have to do that. And so if they do jump in, So you as principal have to kind of, that's going to be a tough one with you and your faculty. And I'm going to talk to both of our principals just in a second. But here's what it says in a handbook of the largest district in the state. This is what it says. Right here. Let me go back here. I had this one queued up, and then I was doing some other reading. Let's see. I think let me go back to where I was. Okay, let me see. We're going to cover disciplinary and due process next week, but according to this handbook,
is that board, I'm sorry, is that board policy we're looking at for CMS?
this is state law and local board policy put together in a code of conduct for a district that is required in state law. Says that 390 says, let me go back here to 390. 390 says that all districts shall do this. That all districts will adopt due process according to 391 right here.
Everybody else gets 2 or 3 out of 4.
Well, I was just asking like for the one that you just was in, and I noticed it says CMS, so I didn't know if that was
that's why I said that's from the largest district. Yeah, that's code of conduct. Every district has to develop a code of conduct. That's in state law.
Right.
That is correct. Let me go to, I had that pulled up in the handbook. So every district has to develop a code of conduct based on state law, which is 115C 391, all those laws that are in it, and it references that right here. And I have that one pulled up for you as well. And it says that you have to, that has to be done. Where's my other one here? Right here. It says that, here we go, disciplinary shall adopt policies to govern the conduct of students. They have to, right here, board policy shall include or provide for the development of student code of conduct. That's what I was referring to. So every district's got a code of conduct, and it's state law. 115C 390.2 says that they have to do that. That every one of those every school district has to do that. So that's local board policy, but there's state law wrapped up in it as well, and it guides the behavior. That's part of due process. And when we talk about arbitrary and capricious next week, we have to go by that handbook. Arbitrary means that, me and Dr. Caton are out behind the building smoking, and Dr. Maraglia catches us. She sends, Dr. Caton back to class and shoots me. That would be arbitrary, and would also be capricious. Probably doesn't say in the handbook you can shoot me for smoking. It has limits on either end, and we're going to talk about that next week. But the law is also clear that that teachers and school folks don't have to jump into a fight. They do not have to do that. And so you know that if you do that, and in order to restrain a student, that you're not legally required to do that. And so it's in the handbook. And again, I had it queued up, and for some reason I lost that piece of it. But trust me, it's in this handbook that says you don't have to jump into a fight. And if you do, that means that you've been trained to do that and that you know what the rules are. Use, approved restraint methods and don't choke them out. And so if you jump in a fight and you haven't been trained and you do happen to get your arm around a kid's neck, it's not going to go well for you. And so those are the two areas that you're going to get hit with negligence, malpractice claims quicker than any other, is lack of supervision and use of restraint in a physical confrontation. That's where you're going to get them. And so that's where you're going to get those malpractice complaints. Now, negligence, there's three types of negligence, and let me get to that before I get to our principles. There's malfeasance, misfeasance, and nonfeasance. Malfeasance is you did the wrong thing knowing it was the wrong thing. Misfeasance is you did the wrong thing but didn't know it was the wrong thing. And nonfeasance means you didn't do anything when you should have. So those are the three standards that you can be sued over on that thing. And so part of the balance is two kids are in a physical confrontation. One of them's not getting, one's getting the best of the other one. It looks like that kid's going to get hurt, but you stood by because you're not legally required, to jump in that fight. Then you get sued for nonfeasance. You should have stopped him from hurting the other kid. But if you jump in and restrain the other kid, you get sued for unlawful use of restraint. That would be malpractice or malfeasance. You did the wrong thing knowingly. So it's a difficult thing.
Dr. Lamb, can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
So I've heard a colleague say in the past that legally you have to say stop fighting twice. Is that the case? Because I know you said that we don't have to jump in, but do we legally have to tell them to stop fighting to cover ourselves?
You have to give them verbal commands, but that doesn't mean that you have to jump in.
Okay.
But now that's a different thing. Verbal commands. You have to tell them to quit. You can't say that. Carry on. Yeah, you're supposed to tell them to quit. But if you haven't been trained and you don't feel capable of that, you're just going to become a victim as well. You're not legally required to physically jump in. But then on the other hand, you could be sued if one of them gets hurt and you didn't stop it. You have to balance that. You have to kind of look and see how it's going. Is there anybody coming to help where I won't have to, choke one out to get him to stop? Can we just get between them, or am I going to get some help or some assistance here? And that comes with experience. I can't tell you how it works every time. It's hard. But of course you would say, stop fighting. But, at some point you have to decide, if I don't get in, is this kid going to get hurt bad enough? His parents are going to sue me. Or if I do jump in and I restrain the one that's being the aggressor, or his parents going to sue me, because I used an improper restraint technique on him or her. And so, it's one of those things. I mean, I learned, one of the good things about me, I learned the first year I taught school that, I made the mistake of jumping in. The assistant principal was just standing watching. We were on lunch duty watching two 9th grade girls fight. And I thought, well, he's old and kind of frail. I guess maybe he just don't want to jump in. And after I jumped in, I realized, because he's a whole lot smarter than me. You couldn't have touched me anywhere on my body with a dime. I didn't have a bruise or a scratch on it or a bite. They nearly killed me. That's the worst whipping I ever had in my life. But that's what you've got to factor in terms of professional judgment, and that's what you've got to train your staff on. I would highly recommend having the restraint training for all of your staff, especially if and when we come back into school, because it's going to be, I'm afraid, places that have been out of school for a long time, kids aren't going to be as civilized as they were when they left. I'm afraid there's going to be a heightened sense of conflict in schools once we ever get back to somewhat normal. Some folks thinking that kids are going to come in and behave themselves like puppies, roll over and let you scratch their bellies. I don't think so. I think it'll be worse than ever after, especially if they've been out for a long period of time. This is something that you would want to revisit with your staff on a regular basis. Principals, I'm going to go to you now on what you have seen or what you believe about restraint or negligence and supervision. I'll give each of you the floor to speak to that.
So for me, restraints definitely, especially if you have.
We're having a problem here on your audio.
Shoot, I have to restart.
No, we're just getting a scratch.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me
No,
now? No?
you were fine earlier, but now it's just static. Dr. Maraglia, you want to go until Dr. Caton can get her, see if she can figure out what's wrong with her.
Well, in terms of negligence, I have to say that when I was looking at that being the topic for this week, the first thing that came to my mind, and I won't go into too much detail, but I know you know what I'm talking about, Dr. Lamb, is a situation where we had a school that had an after school activity and there was no supervision assigned to that event. And even though it was not the principal's specific responsibility to be there, it still fell on to that principal with some very dire consequences.
Right. If it's happening on your campus, you're responsible for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things that, you know, an extension of that is one of the things that always bothered me were these non-authorized activities that, like, for example, it's no longer this way, but back, 20 some odd years ago when I was principal, lacrosse was not a recognized sport by the North Carolina High School Athletic Association. It was what was known as an activity or a club sport. It wasn't officially recognized. But you better believe if they were practicing on our fields, somebody better be supervising them, even though it might not have been one of the 18 recognized sports at that time, men's and women's or boys and girls. If they were on your campus, you can't say, well, I didn't authorize them or they're not a real sport, so I don't have to be. If it's happening on your campus, you better make sure that you got it adequately supervised, whether it's an official sport or not an official sport. And this notion that the bell rings at 3, we're pushing them all out of the lobby at 3:30 and locking the doors, and they're all outside around the building, and they're on their own then. No, that's not true either. That happened at Harding. That's not true either. So it's not just that's your supervision schedule. Once the bell rings, you've got to switch over to your supervision schedule. And if you know there's 40 or 50 kids hanging around your building for another hour, either waiting on their bus or on their rides, you better have somebody out there with them. And it gets really ugly, like the case at Harding when the child that got hurt was a school district employee's child. That got really ugly. Those people aren't going to quit. They're going to, that one's not ever, that one never went away. And so you got to understand that even though you tell parents, come get your kids, get them out of here, get on the bus. If there's 40 or 50 kids on your campus at 3:30, you can't just lock the door and say, I'm done with this. That's not the way that works. But to the point that Dr. Maraglia is making is if it's happening on your campus, you're responsible, and you better figure out some way to supervise it. So that comes back to the law that says principals can assign these duties to teachers. When teachers say, well, I'm off at 3:30. No, you're not.
Mm-mm.
You're off when I say you're off. If we got to supervise, you got to take your turn with everybody else.
And I was going to speak to that also. Just an easy thing to do, especially once you get into an AP role, because more than likely that's where you'll start.
Yeah,
I had a
will.
few people in my cohort that went straight into the principalship, but they were in very small districts where there was
Right.
maybe one high school and that was the plan starting out. But one thing that is just really easy, for example, your athletic events. Before your season even starts, you just need to make it a habit. Sit down with your schedule, with your athletic director, and go ahead and assign your staff members to your sporting events. For football, you're going to need a few more extra people. For volleyball, especially at more at a middle school level, you might not need but a couple of people there. But go ahead and get that figured out, get it to your staff well in advance. Let them know if you've got a schedule conflict. What I always tell them is you switch with someone, let me know what it is so I can update the schedule, but give them plenty of advance warning that this is when you've got your duty schedule. And I'm going to tell you, if they miss it, they make it up. Now, there's still an administrator there for all athletic events, but you need extra bodies there. So that's just get that into your habit and know before every season starts, go ahead and be working on that. And it's really something that if you make yourself a template, you can just use it over and over again and just put your name, plug your names in for what you need and work with your athletic director. Your athletic director. If you have a dance, plan in ahead in advance for that. Make sure you have your police officer and then your staff that you need there.
So I'm going to piggyback on what you said, and then I'm going to add a couple things. For me, I am a very type A personality. I'm kind of an OCD kind of principal. I have everything given to you in a handbook or via web now. Day one, it's got all your duties. It's got all your game schedules. It's got everything. When I hire you, I tell you that, you're going to have this many game duties. You're going to have duties in the morning or whatever. And I also say you're also required to go to graduation and you're also required to go to prom, period, done. That's what it is, because those are some of the things that we have to do. So they know that way in advance. I also want to piggyback also about supervision or restraints that Dr. Lamb talked about. Very, very important, because if you have, like for me, for example, I have 2 district placed classrooms in my building. I don't know if you never heard of that before, but I have an ID mild class, and I also have an autism class in my building as well. So the students with autism sometimes can have behaviors. And so you have to be trained in how to do those restraints. And I will be very honest with you, as a principal, I want to be the one to do the restraint, because I know that I have been trained, and I know that if something hits the fan, I can legally say, I've been trained, I know what to do, things like that. But the teacher has to be trained as well in that room. But I would much rather, if something has to be done and that kid has to be restrained, that it's me, because I'm the one that ultimately is going to have to pay the piper, I guess you would say. So.
I agree 1,000%.
Oh, and I'm sorry. And also I want to say that if we have time later, I would love to show like my master schedule, how I build mine and use some of my data. But anyway, that's if we have time. I don't want to take any more people. I don't want to take everybody's time. Anyway.
Are you prepared to do that tonight?
I can if you want to. I mean, just share.
All right, I'm gonna cut it. I'll cut some time out at the end. I'd like for you to show them that. Now,
Okay.
I agree 1,000% with Dr. Caton. Back in the day when I was a junior high principal in Charlotte, I too had several of those district-wide and area-wide exceptional children's program that were different. We had them in mobile units on the backside off of Eastway Drive. And I was the same way. I preferred that either I or Daryl Kennedy, either he or one of us do the restraint, because we'd been trained and knew what we were doing. I was a lot younger then, and but I worried, again, because I was going to be ultimately responsible. Now, I inherited a group in a BMT in a group that used an inappropriate restraint before I got there. And so one of the things I had to do when I got to that school at the high school was restructure that department over they had used an inappropriate restraint. And so if you're not physically capable of doing that, you need to make sure that you get an assistant principal who can. That may not be the right reason to hire one, but it'd be one for me. But as Dr. Maraglia said, you're not going to get the battlefield promotion. You're not going to get to go from teacher to AP or instructional coach or facilitator to principal. You're going to have to be an AP. And if you can't do that, you need to find somebody who can. But that's one of those things that nowhere in the manual does it says that that's part of the job. But it for your own safety and career longevity and peace of mind, that's one of those things that you better make it a point to get trained yourself, even if you're not going to do it. But get some people there that can do that. Make sure all your teachers, your BMTs, all of your assistants are trained, especially if you're working with exceptional children's programs, because usually that's where it occurs. But that's where you're going to get sued, is on that one, and obviously lack of supervision. And I too like the notion of having everything planned at the beginning of the year. But again, we're talking about your house here. I mean, they don't just come after the district, they come after you and your personal possessions and your assets when you get sued in these cases. And so you need to understand that we're playing for keeps here. All right, we're going to come back to Dr. Caton later. Looking at my watch here and let her share her master schedule. I want to talk about case study 1 for 2 weeks. This is your 2-week notice. I always give you a 2-week notice. So your 2-week notice, you need to start on your case study. And again, the expectation is a PowerPoint. And then after the night, everybody's going to go. We may go along that night, but every group's going to go. You're going to present your case study 1, and it's about grading. Back to my screen share. Please remember 115C 288, the very first 288A. And that's why it's our first case study. Your very, very first role as the principal, your legal responsibility is to grade and classify students. That means, whether you knew it or not, teachers do not assign grades, principals do. You make the final decision about the grade in that classroom. That would be you as principal, not the teacher. They keep the grade book, they write it down, they put it on the report card, but you are the one that actually verifies or agrees or rescinds that grade. It's up to you to make that grading decision. Now, so you've got to understand, and that's, you say, well, Dale, that's pretty simple. I can't tell you the number of grade appeals you're going to have, and parents. See, we're playing pretty high stakes here. On the lower end, we're looking at retention. On the upper end, we're looking at college admissions and scholarships. On the upper end, class rank, all of those kinds of things on the upper end. And parents, who's going to be the valedictorian? Who's going to be the salutatorian? Some parents would run over some kids to get their kids in the front of the line. You better understand that every part of grading, especially as you go up in grade, is going to be scrutinized by every parent, wanting to know QPs, how everything's calculated, what grades did that teacher follow the grading policy of the district and of the school to the nth degree. So this one matters. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that this particular case is not as straightforward as it looks. In that, let me switch over on this browser. Get out of my way. So here's the case study. Will cheating strike Bobby out? I'm going to give you some hints here. I'm not going to do this often, but I'm going to give you some hints. There's a lot in here about the politics of the situation, the superintendent, who Bobby's uncle is, all those kinds of things. But this is the first case study because grading is important. but also to learn to follow the law. Always follow the law. This case is fairly clear, and that the teacher counted one class assignment for more than half of the yearly grade. So let me address that for those of you who don't know. That's inappropriate. It's also illegal. The State Board of Education sets grading policy parameters for the state of North Carolina, and the same thing in South Carolina. And the most any one thing can count, which is a final state exam, is 30%. It can count no less than 20 and no more than 30. Class assignments cumulatively for the year can't count more than 10%. Class tests can't count more than 30%. So we're at 30, 60, 70. And then participation 10 and something else 10. But that's kind of the guidelines. But your district has a grading policy. This is your 2-week notice. Find your district's grading policy. It may be in your faculty handbook at your school, but there's a grading policy for your district that follows that rough outline that the State Board of Education sets aside. So all of a sudden, it ought to dawn on you, ding, 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 ding. This teacher has made one class assignment count more than half the annual grade. You can't even count the state exam that much. That's twice as much as you can count a state exam. How can a teacher take one class assignment? Now, I have a lot of nice people in my classes, and they assume, well, she just didn't know. This is a veteran teacher. You can't make the assumption that she didn't know the grading policy. And so you need to understand. Now, I'm going to get somebody, hopefully not in their presentation, but I usually get somebody who says, well, we'll support the teacher publicly and uphold her decision, but privately we'll tell her she's got to quit that. If you're that dumb, drop out of my course in this program now. If you're that dumb, we don't break. Two wrongs never make a right. You can't support a teacher who's breaking the law simply to show support for teachers. That's not how you show support for teachers. And you will find that out when you lose your home, when you get sued, and lose your home. So please don't think that this is a case where you're being asked to support or not support a teacher. The teacher has broken the law. What are you going to do? Let's make that clear up front. It's right there in the case. She's counted a class assignment more than half the yearly grade. That's a violation of state law. What are you going to do? Don't be one of those people who are dumb enough to say, well, we'll out in public we'll support her, but in private we'll tell her to quit it. No. You won't last a week in the job if you don't have a better thought process than that. But this is the first case. It's on something that you're going to get a lot of, which is grading. But it's the first case so that you understand we always have to follow the law, period. It might be unpopular politically. It might be that teachers are mad at you. None of that matters. First thing you have to learn in case studies is follow the law. All right, so I've given you a lot more than I should have, but I want to make sure that we're all clear on what the expectation is. You are to follow directions here. Be sure that you've read Chapter 6, School Discipline. If you've not read that, also look at your district's policy on grading. What should the principal's course of action be? This is what your PowerPoint should answer. Be sure to address the issues of due process, substantive and procedure, and the standards of arbitrary and capricious. Look at the 4 ethical paradigms, and that's the lesson plan, role of the principal with ethics. That's where you'll find the 4 ethical paradigms. Look at those and do a PowerPoint, answer 2 and 3 above. You've got 15 to 30 minutes to present at next 2 weeks. And then after that, I want you to write a half-page reflection of what you've got. Now, ethics. So here are the 4 ethical paradigms: justice, critique, care, and profession, if I can find them. There we are. They're here at the end. And so I need for you to look at the principal's actions or potential actions in light of these 4 ethical concerns as well. You know, one of the things we say often in our business is just because you can doesn't mean you should. That's the ethical piece. You know, there's an extra layer again of responsibility on top of school people. Beyond the legal part, there's the ethical part as well. And so justice, care, critique, and profession. Look at the principal's action or your suggested actions in light of those 4 ethical. And look at the teacher's actions in light of those 4 ethical concerns as well. You don't have to belabor it, but make sure that you understand that we have not only a legal duty to students, but we have an ethical duty as well to parents and students in our communities. We have an ethical responsibility as well. All right, the 2 things that we were to look at for tonight that lead us into next week and help us to understand all the things that I'm going to cover. There's two documents. I'm not going to go through them. First one is identification and prevention. As we set up due process and discipline for next week, I need for you to understand, if you look at this, it will help you for next week, that the little things become the big, unattended. You know, if you let things just go, the little things become the big things. That's the notion of antecedent behaviors. If you understand that, and you can look through this that I've got, if you understand that if you don't stop the bullying and the gang behavior, you'll have weapons and violent offenses. If you don't stop inappropriate displays of affection, holding hands, kissing and touching, you're going to have sex crimes. If you don't understand that, this will help you to get an understanding of that, which will put next week's session in context. We've got a lot to cover next week on discipline. I want you to make sure that you get a mindset of little things become the big things. If you get that, then we'll be in good shape for next week. And the other is bullying prevention. Every school must do a bullying prevention initiative. And I've got the outline for a school district again, how they wanted theirs done, and it's right here. But again, bullying leads, and cyberbullying leads to so many. People say, well, now that you're not in school, there's no discipline. No, cyberbullying is at an all-time high right now because of kids, with social media. That causes a lot of problems in your school. You need to understand that, and you need to understand that you're going to have some initiatives to stop bullying, and you're really going to have to double down when things get somewhat back to normal on cyberbullying. That's why it's one of our discussion board prompts, the cyberbullying. I'll speak to it more directly when we get there, but please remember, the cyberbullying law was not repealed. The only thing that was changed in the cyberbullying law is if you're in a Twitter war and you start losing, you can't claim that you were being bullied. Let me say that again. For some reason, I have every semester, I have people who write that when they talk to their principal or their administrator or assistant principal about cyberbullying, they were told, "Oh, we don't deal with that here because if it didn't happen here or we can't prove that they sent the tech, the device or the location has nothing to do with cyberbullying. If students in your school are involved and it affects the educational environment, you're required by law to deal with it. The only thing that was repealed in the cyberbullying law was the part where, again, if Anna and I are in a Twitter war and I start losing, I can't claim that she's bullying me if I was engaging in her on social media. That's the only thing that's changed. The rest of it is still there. So when you have administrators say to you, we don't have to deal with that, yes, they do. They're just pretending. They're just pretending that they don't. And again, you have a kid harm themselves or a kid gets harmed, and it's just as likely that a kid will harm himself because of cyberbullying, and you see if you have to deal with it or not. You may have to not only lose your house, you may have to do a little prison time over that. So look at these 2 things. It will set up next week's presentation on discipline. Again, make sure you read your case study, your teams you're already formed. Make sure that you get together and start putting together your collaborative PowerPoint for 2 weeks. Make sure that you've got that. Now, next week, I'm not going to have time to cover a lot of the things tonight. I always plan a night like this so we can kind of catch up. Next week, discipline's going to take all of next. We may even run late next week because discipline is a lot and due process to cover, but we're going to try to knock it all out in 1 week. So if you've read the 2 PowerPoints that I had tonight that lead into next week, it will speed us through next week. We'll get through a whole lot faster. Also, next, I'm going to talk about the skip for just a minute, and then we're going to go to Dr. Kate. Now, I'm not going to pull up and do tasks and prompts, but let me remind you, once you get through task 4, you will send it to me. It does not have to be peer reviewed. I'll tell you to put it all together, to put your OMA and turn it in, and then we'll go straight to task stream, and then you will start your skip. The big thing about the skip is the long and short term, and I'm going to talk about them briefly next week. I'm going to talk about short-term and long-term goals that you have to identify early on in task 1 of the skip. The difference between a short and long-term goal. A short-term goal would be some sort of social media to better hook up with parents. Those things. A long-term goal would be a parent math night or family night. So make sure that you understand, and I'm going to plant that seed. And so I'm going to talk with you about that next week, about task 1 of the skip. That's why I said we got a busy week next week, but I'm going to talk about that. But I want you to, this week, again, look at those 2 PowerPoints. I want you to read the task and prompt so that if you have any questions about the skip as I cover it next week, you'll be ready, because I'm going to cover the skip quickly next week before we dive into discipline. All right, Dr. Caton, you've got the floor. You want to share your screen?
I'm going to do my best. I hope I know what I'm doing. Isn't that bad? I'm trying really hard with technology sometimes. Okay, so let me just tell you a little bit about what I'm showing you, and if you have any questions or anything, just
There
let
we
me know.
go.
I'm at a small school. I only have 600 students. So let me show you what you're looking at first of all. So my master schedule is devoted, or is pretty much revolves around, we started a freshman academy 3 years ago. So freshman academy for us is only certain students, because we cannot do all students in freshman academy. We have some students, when they come into us, they've already been proficient in math 1, so they start with math 2. So what we do is students who we pull EVAS at the we usually do it about May, and we see what the student's predictability is. So over here, I have it blacked out. Their student's name, and I have what what their probability to make a level 3 is on the math 1 or that's what they got for the math 1 EOC, and then their projections for English 2. And they were currently in 8th grade. So what they're projected for math 1, what they're projected for English 2, because you don't have English 1 projections, because that's a North Carolina final exam. So any student that was below 50%, then we decided that they would be freshman academy. If you look at this student right here, there was only a 1% probability that they could possibly get a 3, or they could get proficient. So these are my students who are pretty much, who are my lower level students in our building. So they are taking math 1 year long, and is paired with English 1. And so we're on 90-minute blocks. So these students are 45 minutes and 45 minutes. We call them skinnies, and they're year long instead of being in semester. And so when you go to my master schedule, you'll see that it's in there, and I'll show you that. So freshman academy is big for me, and EC, talking about federal laws, Dr. Lamb talked about. This is my EC schedule. Then I'm going to show you how it goes into the master schedule. EC schedule recently, people got a lot of, the state said that a lot of high schools were not scheduling their students like they should for EC. In high school, because of their semesters, you might have a student who only took, in high school in Pitt County, we call it curriculum assistance for 1 semester. Well, that's against the federal law. You have to do it year long. So if you look at us, and I'm going to try to show you I got kids' names here. I apologize. Please just, don't look. But what we did is all these students that you see here were tested. And I can tell you, if you look, this says CA. The A, this is the book level that this student is on. They're in level A. All these students here in level B. So then if you look, these students are year long. So this is getting ready to get confusing. So this student, Brendan McCall, he is in the first half of this class, and then he goes to the second half and he goes into reading. And if you look, there he is there. So 45 minutes with the reading person, 45 minutes here with the math person, because he is learning disabled in math and reading. So you'll see it says the students are standard course of study. They have direct instruction. That's what the DI stands for. If you also see in here, you have some students who have standard course of study curriculum assistance. That means this student does not need a direct instruction plan. Their instruction that their IEP just says that they need curriculum assistance. They don't have to have. They are on grade level for their reading or math. So that's what that says. Or either Mark Dillahunt, if you go to him, well, he does. He's got curriculum assistance only. But that's how I look at my things. And if you also see here, this is very rare for people to do. These students are in the regular course of study, and they're in such a low level that actually they're in a class with some of the OT kids who are also in the same reading level math program as well. So you see, they have no idea, because it's all based on the levels that the students are. So these are my this drives my big schedule, then, which leads to my master schedule. So I kind of have a schedule within a schedule, if that makes any sense. So then when you look at, let's see, so here's my schedule. This is the second semester here going on. And so if you look at, let me see if I can find my exceptional children's, and they might, you really can't see what's going on. It just says CA, but on that end, it's like I said, it's a schedule within a schedule. She knows that she has 45 minutes, and then she goes and has the 45 minutes again. So she has 2 class periods within there. Same thing when you go up to my math, it looks like a normal schedule, but it's like a schedule within the schedule, because I had the freshman academy going on, and then I have the EC schedule going on as well. So I probably confused everybody tremendously, but showing you that you use your EVOS data, you use your EC data to build your schedules. So at least that's
excellent. What Dr. Caton just gave you was an example of what's known as a mosaic schedule. It's either a school within a school or a schedule within a schedule. And the whole notion here is if they're supposed to confuse you. They're supposed to be difficult. If you get it right, if your master schedule meets all the needs that it's supposed to be confusing. It's supposed to be higher level. It's not just supposed to be, bell ring, go to class, bell ring, go to the next class. It's not ever going to be that easy. If you follow all your federal law with all your federal programs, they got to be first. That's why it's a schedule within a schedule. And then your EVOS data. So what we're doing is we're individualizing instruction for every school kid in the building, even those OCS, occupational course of study, who don't get it. But the whole notion of what we have to do with the master schedule now, and thank you for this, Dr. D. The whole notion is we have to individualize pretty much instruction for every kid now. We have to address every kid. We start with our federal programs, but we've got to direct what they need to them based on their scores on EVOS, who they need to be with, what classes they need to be in, what teachers need to be teaching them, the EC, making sure that we get all the required amount of time. And the EC's got to come first, because it's the 800-pound gorilla. Federal law comes first, and then our state law that tells us how many minutes and all that, and then our local initiatives. But then comes our EVOS data that informs the other half of the actual who teaches what, where, when. After the EC comes first, then EVOS comes right behind that, once we put it in the context of our state and local law and policy. That's the way you have to build a schedule nowadays, where every child in the building is facilitated. And we can say that we're customizing an educational experience for every kid in our building, which goes back 30 years this year to what? No Child Left Behind. The whole notion of No Child Left Behind is we were eventually at some point down the road going to get to where every child had basically either an IEP or a PEP. either an individual education plan or a personal one. That's the whole notion. And if you can't schedule a school that way, if you don't understand that, if you still think that you give, the best kids to the most politically connected teachers, you will not make it in this business. It just won't happen.
Dr. Lamb,
Yes.
just one quick question. How do AIG students fall into this? Because I know it's not federal, it's more.
Yeah, they are federal.
They are
most
federal.
certainly are. AIG students are most certainly federal. And you have to, the one thing about them though is they have the fewest amount of restrictions or the most required. They have the least amount of requirements. But they are identified. They are supposed to be on a PEP. It is a federal program. Now, it's not funded very heavily. I will say that. And so we don't count it as traditional exceptional children, but it is federal and it does come under the umbrella of exceptional children. But
Okay.
we do have to meet their needs. Yes.
So there's a, okay, that's just a question because our middle school in the district that I work in, they, within their scheduling, they've always kind of, I guess, struggled with the AIG students. And this year in particular, they made students choose whether they wanted to take advanced math or advanced reading, even if they were labeled in both. And so they had to choose. And that, of course, that made a lot of parents upset. But
No joke.
yeah, but it just came down to, they were saying, well, it doesn't work in the schedule. So legally, are they allowed to do that?
Yes and no.
Okay.
All right. So here's the deal. You're not allowed to say we can't schedule it because you can, or you can hire somebody that, knows more than me probably, but you can hire somebody to come in and do it. What they're saying is we didn't have somebody. We don't have somebody. We can provide one or the other, but we can't get a teacher for both. Is what they really meant. And so you have to choose because we can't hire, the federal money doesn't extend to several teachers like it does for EC. Usually you get one teacher that's split and they'd have to do both, or if the local had some money, they get a second teacher to add into the schedule to cover that. But rarely will you get more than one teacher, and I'll let Dr. Caton speak to this one and Dr. Maraglia. But I never got more than one position ever. And one school district I was in, I only got a half, and the county had to pay, local had to pay the other half. The notion that AIG is an exceptional children's program in federal, the similarity ends after that. You do not get that kind of money and staffing. And so what they're saying is it's not that they couldn't figure out how to do it in the schedule. They just they don't have the staffing to do it because they weren't funding at a level to be able to do it, because they had so many kids identified, you had to get one or the other. They didn't have the staffing for everybody to get both. Now, is that legal? Well, it has to be if you don't have the staffing.
Well, they have 5 certified AIG teachers.
Well, that's what I mean. You get a certain level, but
right.
that's as many as you get. And if you have more students than that, then it's go fish. You just have to basically say we can't offer any more than this. You got to make some choices. We've given you all that we have, the money or the personnel for. And districts, locals are not required to put any additional money with that. They can choose not to. Now, some districts do and some don't. But once the teachers run out in terms of their head count, how many students they can serve, after that, you just have to tell parents you got to start making choices when the money and the personnel run out. And that they're the same thing, the money for the personnel. The feds pay those salaries. Now, I wonder how many of those AIG teachers are actually federal paid and how many of them are local. State doesn't pay for AIG teachers. That's either the local or the feds.
They're actually just all regular ed teachers who have the AIG certification.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah. So
there's probably nobody. Probably the feds aren't. I've never heard of the feds paying for 5. Most I ever got was 1. Dr. Caton, how many federally paid AIG teachers do you have?
In the high school level?
Yeah.
One.
What I mean, that's all I ever got was one.
I
And I had
mean,
3,000 students and I only got one.
but now for at the high school level is different. You know, when I was in
Yeah.
elementary, I had one, but in my county, we bused kids from smaller schools for
Right.
the AIG. So that's what we did for that. We shared. Because
Yeah.
I only had in my elementary school only had about 8 or 9 AIG, so we bused them to another school for their AIG services.
Now, when I was a middle school principal, I didn't, the county, I got a half, I got feds paid for half and the county paid for half, but that was it. And the most I ever got as a high school principal was one, and I got one as a junior high principal. Most I ever got was one, federally paid. But now, remember, that was in schools with, I had 3,000 in the high school and I had about 1,400 in junior high. So I got one each for those places. But I'll bet you, it's according, Rachel, it's according to what size school you're in, you're probably not getting anywhere between 0 and 1, maybe a half paid for by feds. And the local, I mean, the money runs out.
Right.
I mean, that's just the way it works. I mean, because it has to, they give so little funding for AIG. It's another one of those, what we call in the business, an unfunded mandate. Yes, it's federal, and yes, you have to serve them, but they don't provide a lot of support for you to do that. It's not like Title I where there's a ratio. This many kids get you this much. Doesn't work that way in AIG.
So when you're building the schedule, I guess out of federal, that would be the lowest on,
yes,
like on the hierarchy.
You go with what is the most restrictive. EC is the most restrictive, then Title I, and it goes down from that, and then the least restrictive under the federal is AIG. There's even more restrictions in high school on CTE programs than there are on AIG programs. AIG is the lowest rung of the federal programs in terms of restrictions.
And
There's,
ESL.
EC is the most, EC 504, Title I,
ESL.
ESL comes next. That's right. ESL comes next. Any of those, any other special props programs you have for disadvantage, then comes CTE, and then comes AIG. CTE is career and technical education. What started out as vocational became occupational and now is career and technical. That's federal as well.
Well, gifted teachers are not even required to be certified because
that's what I mean.
I don't have any teachers who are certified. We just make sure that our gifted kids in CMS, we have what is considered honors in middle school. And we make sure, unless for EVOS tells us something differently, they go into the honors classes. And we have a facilitator on campus who wears multiple hats.
Special props coordinator, yep.
But also at the middle school level, you have to have a parent meeting at the beginning of the year. You have to make sure they have a PDP or their growth plan, which is pretty much the same thing for everybody. It's nothing at all like EC. Now in elementary, I had one TD teacher, we call it talent development, and she would either pull children a certain number of times a week and work with them, or she would push into the classrooms and work with them in the classrooms.
Yeah,
and so that was how that was handled. But yeah, I would say most of the middle schools in Charlotte, it's just you put your TD kids in your honors classes, and that's how, and for math and for reading, and that's how you cover it.
So in the end, to kind of summarize, for AIG programs, they take on the shape and or they take on the life of what the district wants them to have. They are the least restrictive in terms of federal, other than they have to be identified and they have to be served. After that, the district can kind of figure it out. They give you very little. There's not a lot of restrictions. There's not a lot of guidelines. There's not a lot of, you must do this. Now, on the other end of the spectrum with EC kids, all that's in place. but AIG not so much. So a lot of it is what your local district is willing to do and is willing to fund. You know, will they even fund teachers to go and get their AIG certification? Will you do a pull-out type program? You know, we've gotten away from it somewhat, but you know, there was a time then when we were pulling kids into schools under the umbrella of magnets in order to serve the AIG kids. We did that in Charlotte Mecklenburg for a long time. For 15 years, we did that at the elementary and middle level. We would pull kids, declare a site a countywide magnet, and pull those AIG kids to that school to be able to serve them. We got away from that, in 2010 or 2011. We got away from that in 2011, but from the 15 years prior to that, that's exactly what we did in Charlotte. And it made it so that everybody that worked in that building went and got that certification and had that group of kids. That's how we handled it for a while, but then we had a superintendent that didn't like that notion and broke that up. And so those kids haven't been served as well. And guess what? A lot of those have left the district now for privates and charters because they felt like they weren't getting what they had gotten before. But that's how that goes. But his iteration or his thought process is we're not going to create boutique schools. Well, he didn't seem to understand that you can break those magnets up and stop that, where all the kids at that, you know, like my wife taught for 15 years at Davidson IB was open, and all those kids are AIG kids, and that's how they served them. Well, when you stop that and close that school, a lot of those parents, and you just put them back in traditional middle school, a lot of those parents opted out of the district. Happened all over the district. And so that's part of it too, is, you know, the political piece of it. Do you want to get rid of those kids? Do you want to run those families off? Do you want to try to facilitate those families and keep them, or is your model we'll just keep whoever stays? So that's part of that AIG conundrum, unfunded mandate. But it matters. Those parents are highly motivated, highly charged, highly political, and highly interested in their kids. And so you ignore them and don't facilitate them at your own peril, as CMS found when they just left in droves. So that's what happened.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything for the evening before we go? Well, I appreciate your time and again, the talent and the input from our principals tonight. I always just kind of catch them cold every week, so they have to kind of be on their toes. But again, excellent job from both of them. And again, thank you, Dr. Caton, for confusing us all to make everybody understand it's not as easy as it looks, and that there's a reason why you have to learn all this stuff and know what your priorities are, because it gets very muddled. It gets very confusing, but if you know what your priorities are, you can make it, you can work through this, but you have to know what's important. You have to know your EC programs come first, and you have to know that then with that schedule, it has to integrate and fold into the other one, and it's built on EVOS, and you have to integrate the two together. That's a mosaic, a schedule within a schedule, or a school within a school. That's a perfect example. All right, I will see y'all all next week, and we'll talk about the skip, and then we'll tackle due process and discipline. I hope everybody has a good week. Appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Good night.
Dr. Lamb.
Bye.
Bye. Dr. Lamb, I'm sorry, I have
Yes.
a question. Everyone else can leave, but so with OT and speech therapy,
Yes.
or EC. So,
Yes.
okay. So how does that work in terms of, so at my school, we have just an hour time of intervention to share between math and reading, and then our students are taken out for speech during that time. So they're missing reading intervention or math intervention. So I'm assuming that since it's under that blanket or under that umbrella of EC in terms of speech, that's okay, even though they qualify for some type of intervention for speech or reading. Like, How does that work?
PT, OT, all of those, OHI, all of those are federal. Federal, and remember, intervention is local.
Mhm.
Even though intervention kids get the same rights as EC kids, they're not at that same level in the hierarchy. And so if it comes down to one getting pulled out of the other, EC always wins. It's just that simple. Intervention, reloop, whether it's RTI or MTS, MTS is part of your MTS, your multi-tier system of support, which is your
Yes.
intervention program, whether you're using RTI or some other CANS program, or you're doing, or whether you're doing customized lessons for intervention. Remember, intervention is local. That's why that's one of the things that I'll talk about later is intervention team is what's known as a school-based committee. That means it's in charge of the principal's in charge of, but it also means it's a local initiative. And so in the hierarchy, federal law trumps local board policy, which is intervention teams are founded and run under the auspices of local. Now, the state is trying to be a player in the game, requiring that everybody do MTSS, but they're still less than federal. Federal always is, the 800-pound gorilla. They have to come first always. Now, I would say that the model that you have just shared with us is not an ideal model.
Yeah.
But what has happened is it's because of your specials, because of your scheduling, that the only time that those people are available, you're doing all of your specials at one time, which is your pullouts for intervention, your pullout for all these other things. You're doing it all at one time because
Yes.
of specials. That's a bad way to schedule a school, by the way.
Well, okay. And so, yeah. And
I could help them fix that in about a half an hour, but you'd have to have the political will to do it, though.
well,
But it's
and
just
that's,
easy to do it that way.
yeah. And that's what I was going to ask you, because I mean, like, I am newer at this school. The school that I came from, I don't know, our principal, her schedule was beautiful. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. Like, it's just beautiful. And
Yeah.
everything, she was very type A, uber organized.
Right.
And then I came to this school and it was, okay, lunch at this time, this is at this time, you figure out the rest.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
And so I just was like, what?
Well, you saw what you have to do with Dr. Caton's schedules tonight. You have to do a mosaic. A mosaic may have 4 or 5 schools within a school, or schedules within a school. But you have to be type A, and you have to pert out every kid. But here's the thing: you can't let teachers you can't let them decide what their schedule is if you do the mosaic. You have to tell them who they're going to teach when and where. And see, a lot of principals don't want to do that. Again, they want to do I'll guarantee you what your experience is because of your pull out and your specials. Because those people say when they're going to teach classes and when they're going to do it, and you can't accommodate them both. I could accommodate them both in a few minutes. Now, they might burn my house down because people would be so mad.
Right.
I could do you a schedule in 30 minutes that would accommodate both, but you just have to have the political will to do that. Now, it'd make everybody mad. Even the Pope would be pissed off. Everybody'd be mad, but I could make the schedule work for you.
Well,
See,
I think that most of the classroom teachers would be happy.
Yeah, some of them, but the ones who's right now, the sun, the ones that's the sun shining on their behinds right now, they'll be mad.
Right.
So what I'm going to do for a small district in North Carolina tomorrow is this very same thing. And I know what their problem is I've got to convince them. You've got to quit trying to make friends with teachers and get brownie points and political points through the master schedule. You got to design master schedules that actually keep us out of court and try to do better with our scores.
But you know what? It's not that hard to do that, because one of the things that's a requirement from the state is that teachers have a duty-free lunch. And
Right.
another requirement is that they have planning. And we are able every day to give our teachers not only a duty-free lunch, but they also get a period of planning. Our schedule changes every single day, Monday through Friday. It is different every day. Now, you're talking about confusing people. That is definitely going to confuse people. But the teachers like that, and they have requested it. You know, we've made sure we've done all the other requirements, but
Mhm.
they like it because, you know, if you ever had that one class at the end of the day that is just so tough,
Yeah.
well, now you don't have that class at the end of the day every single day of the week. Some days you have them first thing in the morning, they may not be so tough. Sometimes you have them in the middle of the day. So it's very confusing, but once you get into it, people have it, they understand it, and the teachers like it. But it's also a thing where it's like, okay, is this working? What's not working within the parameters that we have to follow? And but we also don't do block scheduling like most middle schools do. We've gone back to having 7 periods a day.
As you should.
Absolutely.
You can't
Alan
you
Queen
can't do
killed us
blocks
on
you
that.
can't do virtual blocks 90 minutes. Can't do that.
Oh, well, no, we don't do that either. No, I'm talking about in
But
person.
I mean, you can't. I'm hoping that this is going to refocus people on the notion that they, for whatever reason, we will acknowledge that we can't do virtually 90 minutes. Why do we think we can do 90 minutes face to face?
Exactly,
We
because
should have
90
never gotten
minutes
away,
is
you
do
know,
your
from
work and now do your homework.
yeah.
That's what it is. But when
That's
you've
exactly
got
right.
when you got 50 minutes,
You
that
know,
teacher's on it and doing what needs to be done.
I actually, of all the schedules I ever ran, the one that I like the best, and it's a stretch, and I acknowledge it. It's from too long ago, won't work. I like the 6-period day the best, and and so now that's 7 periods, but I like that 6-period schedule the best. And we did it in 55 minutes.
Mhm.
But I like the 45 to 50 of a 7-period day, and
Yes.
not sit and do homework or do warm up exercises or try to figure out a way to kill 45 minutes. 45 minutes is about all you need.
Mhm.
I like the 55-minute classes because one of the things that we did in those, we didn't do homeroom.
We don't do homeroom.
And we could do some of our, you know, we could do some of our housekeeping things during that time. But I really like that, and I think we ought to go back to that. I think 90 minutes is
agree.
too long.
I've never agreed. I came out of the classroom right about the time the block
Yeah.
scheduling started, and I was so glad because I've
Yeah.
never agreed with that.
But you know, we can figure out things in scheduling if we have the political will to. But what generally happens is it gores somebody's ox, and we've always done it this way, and we'd have to do all this extra work, or teachers wouldn't like it because of when their planning was, or you know, or we want to, you know, we have to share this special with that school. You know, we got a halftime PE or a halftime art, and it would just be too confusing or too much work or whatever. And so, but the truth of the matter is, we can figure these things out. But
Dr. Lamb, sorry to interrupt you, but this is Ms. Coleman, and I would love your assistance in figuring it out because I've been tasked to do my EC department.
right.
And last year we didn't have electives because I don't know why. He just took electives from our EC department. But when I gave him my task 3, he said, well, I can do the EC teacher schedule. So I would love your help if you're I got 30 minutes for you anytime you like, if you can help me write that out.
All right.
Because I don't even understand it.
Well, it goes back to what Dr. Caton was showing tonight.
Mhm.
You got to know what program each kid's in, what their
Mm-hmm.
exceptionality is, whether they're traditional diploma or whether they're a certificate of study, the COS student, and then what their IEP says they're supposed to
Yes.
get, whether
So
they're
we're middle school.
native or
So you got to know what's in that IEP. One
Yeah.
thing that's going to be very helpful is if you were to make a spreadsheet, have
Mhm.
every child on there, and you
Well,
need to know, are they resourced?
So now that's going to be sorry. I'm sorry, Dr. Margolo. We're an alternative school, so right now I only have 7 students in a whole building.
Well, that's gonna be easy then. I mean,
So it's according to the teachers.
but
Because the
what
7 students.
No, it's according to the IEPs.
the
You need to look
IEP
at the
I don't have any
IEPs.
students. We don't have any students in our building because the students that we have this what do you call it? We have a oh goodness, an intervention program that's inside the building. Oh gosh, I'm in Cumberland County, and we have what is the program called, Ms. Coleman? We have a day treatment, and the day treatment is the only people with the kids in the building, but they're not assigned to the school, if that makes sense. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, you're in a public separate. I get it, like McLeod Center.
But you still should have access to their IEP,
But
so
you-
you know what service level they have to have.
Exactly. Your master schedule for EC is, as Dr. Caton showed you, their master schedule for EC, she had each kid coded about, what their exceptionality is, what their service level is, whether it's consultative or whether they get a pull out or whether they do
Inclusion.
inclusion. There's 3 different levels.
So it's only inclusion in our school. All our classes are inclusion.
Well, then that makes it easy, because then they can all be in a cohort, and you can have your regular ed teacher and your EC teacher together for your math and your language arts.
That's correct.
And they can even go in and provide some services during science and social studies as well. That's very easy.
We're actually going to do a case study on the inclusion model later on this semester. Your last case study is on the inclusion model.
I got this big smile on my face because I'm listening to y'all say it's easy, and I'm like, what?
You just
It really is.
You just got to know what their IEP says to do.
Right. If they're all the same thing, that's really easy. It's
Or
when
if
you got a
they're
little
all
of
the
this and some of
same
that and a lot of that.
exceptionality, and they're all
So when you
included.
say the same thing, we talking like SED, IDMAL, and AU?
No. Your services. Your services.
You have to know what their exceptionality is.
Right.
And that may separate them, but their service level, there's three different service levels that go with their exceptionality. For example, you've got either consultative, or you've got pull out, or you've got inclusion. And so all of your service model is inclusion. All right, now. So that means that your 2 teachers will be together working with them, I'm guessing virtually, since you said they aren't in the building.
Right.
They would come on together.
Yeah.
And they can do a breakout room now. If they're not too disparate in terms of what their exceptionality is, what they've been certified as, if they're not too disparate, you can group them together even beyond that, and then the 2 teachers work with them. Now, if they're too far apart, how many of those 7 students, how many different exceptionalities do you have? I mean, how many of them are specific learning disabled? How many of them might be,
all of them right now are SED. They all in a SED setting.
Oh boy, they're all SED and all inclusion?
Then they all would have the same schedule.
Yeah, they all have the same schedule. Then this is getting easier by the minute.
But the biggest thing is if you do need to know if they are either OHI or learning disabled, you need to know that. But what's even more important is what level of service is required and in what content area. Is it math and or language arts? That's the main thing you have to know.
So I think because it's math and science.
Every now and then you get a kid who might be resource for math and inclusion for language arts. That gets a little tricky. Yep. Most of the time, they're going to be the same thing for both of those 2 content areas. They're not going to have a disability. The disability is not going to apply to science and social studies. You can provide services through them, but you're talking about math and reading only.
No, ixnay on the math. When you said math, no math. No science, no social studies.
Okay.
We're providing services only for reading and math.
Okay.
But they can, if you need it to, if you have a really complicated schedule and a really complicated group of EC kids, we have provided services through science and social studies before. It's not best practice, but you can do it.
It won't be in there unless it's in their IEP, and it won't be unless it's some extraordinary circumstance. It's only going to be reading and math.
Right.
You want them to get regular services in science and social studies. You only want to give them EC. You don't want, every time, it's understanding it's exponential. It's hard to do reading. it's 10 times as hard to do reading and math. And it's 10 times harder than that to do reading, math, and social studies, and 10 times harder than that to do math, reading, social studies, and science. Understanding it's not just a little bit harder. It gets exponentially harder every time you add another discipline, another subject area. It gets exponentially harder to serve them and to make a schedule for them. And so we only serve in math and reading, and we let them go to the regular schedule for all their other classes. And so we're doing inclusion model on all of them. And there's only 7 of them. It would be reasonable that they could, that unless like Dr. Maraglia says, unless they're just one of those, they've got different levels of services, you know, between that differ from math to reading. Usually it's the same. But I have seen IEPs that said you get 1 service level for reading and 1 service level for math. But if they're all similar, you know, you're going to pull them all together. They're going to be with you all at one time. Don't make it, don't complicate this by trying to add anything other than reading and math.
No.
And pull,
because you can cover everything they need with those 7 kids. That is like, gosh, that's a dream.
Yeah. That's eminently doable. But you got to know all the things that you saw on Dr. Caton's spreadsheet tonight. You got to know what all your variables are. And once you know those,
I'm gonna be calling you back.
Those can do it. Well, Dr. Malaglia is the, you know, she lives this every day.
I'm be calling somebody back because I surely don't get it.
But we'll be glad to talk to walk you through this and look at what you've got. But there's only 7 of them. It can't be that complicated with 7 of them, unless again,
but we were doing
adding additional courses.
Right, we were doing teachers. I wasn't even doing the kids per se. When we was making schedules, we make them according to the teacher that the kid is assigned to.
No, you got to do it according to the IEP. And of course, you also have to have a teacher who is EC certified.
Right.
That's the only thing that would mean anything about using the teacher.
No,
well, all the teachers are EC certified. Well, our EC teachers are all certified, but
yeah. But no, you can't do it by teacher. You got to do it by kid. That's what Dr. Caton just showed you. She had all those kids' names and had all the different and had all the different. They had all their variables. You know, whether they were diploma or certificate. You know, what level of service, what their exceptionality. You have to do it that way. We don't. When we build schedules by teachers, that's to benefit them and not students. That's to make their lives easier. That's how we used to do it back in the old days. That was one of my old days stories from the back. You know, the principal that I worked for, it was a community institution, Tommy Porter. Everybody loved Tommy. But Tommy built the schedule on teachers. When do you want planning? Which kids do you want? That's the way Tommy built the schedule. It never dawned on him that you built the schedule to serve kids or to get any kind of academic performance. That was in the era before accountability. You built the schedule for the convenience of the teachers, for the adults. Too many schools still try to do that today, and you can't.
That's how our school is ran right now.
Yeah.
Well, what I would suggest is the first thing you do is to pull their IEPs.
Okay.
Okay. Look at, just to verify, because you don't want to just make an assumption. Look and see what their service level is for reading and math. More than likely, it's going to be inclusion, but just double check.
Okay.
And make yourself a spreadsheet with every kid's name, a math and a reading column, and put in there what their service level is. That's something I do with my EC teachers every year. And I use that spreadsheet throughout the year. I don't just use it when I'm scheduling at one particular time of the year. I'm always going back to it and referring to it and updating it if anything changes in an IEP meeting.
Okay.
So that I would start there. You can't do anything else until you do that. So that's your very first task.
So I'll do that tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that'll also be giving you some experience looking at IEPs and service level and things like that.
Okay.
But in the end, you remember that little thing I read from Brad?
Yes.
Start tonight is we build the master schedule for academic achievements for kids. We don't build it for the convenience of the adults in the building.
Mhm.
That was my whole, kind of conclusion to master schedule tonight, is to remember that when you take some of these ideas back to your school, some people are not going to be happy with this.
Right.
Because their school was always scheduled for the convenience of the adult. I know that we're now 30 years into accountability, and there's still plenty of schools around that build their master schedule on what's convenient for the adults in the building rather than what's good for kids and what gets academic achievement. And that's what Dr. Caton shared with you tonight, her spreadsheet of how they map every one of those kids. Now, they've only got 600 kids in their high school, but I'll bet they've probably got 100 kids in EC. And so, they're 12% of the population. So how many is that? 72? She's probably got 72, 75, 80, something like that. But they map every one of those kids out. And that, she builds that one first. And then EVOS informs the bigger one, and then she has to fold it in. And that's what we're talking about here is we build these schedules for academic achievement for the kids, for our school to grow and the kids to do better. We don't just do the master schedule to make it a good place for adults to work.
Okay.
Now I'm gonna tell you, your experience is not uncommon. I mean, is not uncommon. Unfortunately, it's all too common. And that's why I'm sure that what they're wanting me to do tomorrow in this little small takeover district that I'm working for tomorrow is to have a come to Jesus meeting with them about what the purpose of master scheduling is. Because I'm quite sure one of the reasons that why that district is failing and is a takeover, it's a small city district, one of the 14 that are left in North Carolina. Why it's failing is because I'm quite sure they build their master schedule to make their teachers happy. Because that's just tradition how it's worked. And so it's a small city district, and they want to try to change. And so, I'll be in this rant tomorrow with them. And we'll see how it goes. The good thing about it is I'm worth what you pay me. And so, but I mean, this is the conversation that I'm going to have with five APs and 2 principals tomorrow is quit it.
Well, I thank y'all, and I'm sorry to take up some extra time with y'all, but I'm grateful. I'm gonna surely look at it.
All right. Get back in touch with us. All right, everybody, have a good evening.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.